and then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started?
Think about that question for a second. Not losing a job, not getting laid off, not walking away, being removed from the thing you built with your own hands, from the vision nobody else believed in until you made them believe, from the company that had your name written all over its DNA. And the people who did it were the same people you trusted to help you build it. What does that do to a person? What happens when the dream you gave everything to decides it doesn't need you anymore? Most people never come back from that. But this man didn't just come back. He came back and changed the world twice. And the story of how he got there is not what you'd expect. But this isn't just a story about someone who got fired. Those stories happen every day. This one is different because most people who get fired lose something that belonged to someone else. He lost something he created, something he had imagined before it even existed, and the people who took it from him weren't strangers. They were the people he had chosen, the people he had trusted. And here's what makes this story so hard to understand. The firing wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the question that followed him home that night. Who am I without the thing I built? That question almost broke him. And then it rebuilt him into something the world had never seen. Before anyone knew his name, he was just a kid who didn't quite fit. Not in school, not in the world around him. He was adopted, raised in Cupertino, California, a quiet suburb that would later become the center of the technological universe. But back then, it was just a place where a restless boy couldn't sit still long enough to care about the things everyone else cared about. He dropped out of college after 6 months, not because he gave up, because he refused to spend his parents' life savings on something that didn't feel right. So he slept on the floor of friends' dorm rooms. He collected empty Coca-Cola bottles for the 5-cent deposits just to buy food. He walked 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one decent meal at a temple that fed strangers. And he was okay with all of it, because something inside him already knew that the conventional path wasn't his path. He was following something else, something he couldn't fully name yet. A hunger, a sense that somewhere out there, something was waiting to be built that nobody had built yet. And he was the one who was going to build it. So, at 20 years old, in his parents' garage, with his best friend and almost no money, he started not a company, a vision. And for the next 10 years, he poured everything he had into making that vision real, until the day everything he built was taken from him. The company he built had grown beyond anything he had imagined. 2 people in a garage had become thousands of employees. A vision nobody believed in had become one of the most valuable companies in the world. And he was 30 years old, at the top of everything he had ever wanted, but something was wrong. The man he had hired to help him run it had a different vision, and in a company that could only move in one direction, one of them had to go. The board chose the other man, and just like that, he was out. Not quietly, not privately, publicly. The whole world watched as the man who had created something from nothing was removed from it, and the silence that followed was deafening. He met with people he admired. He tried to apologize for failing so publicly. He even thought about disappearing, leaving everything behind, starting over somewhere nobody knew his name. Because when the thing you built from nothing rejects you, it doesn't just feel like losing a job. It feels like losing yourself. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea who he was without it. And that question followed him everywhere. Into the mornings when he woke up with nowhere to be, into the meetings he was no longer invited to, into the conversations where people looked at him differently now. Not as a visionary, not as the man who had changed everything, just as someone who had failed, very publicly, very completely. And for a few months, he didn't know what to do. He just sat with it, the weight of it, the humiliation of it, the silence of it. And in that silence, something slowly started to shift. Not hope exactly, something quieter than that, a realization that everything they had taken from him, the title, the office, the company, they couldn't take the one thing that had started all of it, the hunger. It was still there, burning exactly the same way it had burned when he was sleeping on floors and collecting bottles for food. And in that moment, he made a decision. Not to get revenge, not to prove anyone wrong, just to build again. Because that was the only thing he had ever known how to do. And this time, nobody could stop him. And the man sitting there, in that silence, with nothing left but the hunger that started it all, wasn't just anyone. He wasn't just another executive who lost a power struggle. He wasn't just another founder who got pushed out of his own company. That man was Steve Jobs. And he did what he always did. He built. He started a new company, small, underfunded, ignored by most people who had once taken his calls. But he didn't care, because for the first time in years, he wasn't building for a board. He wasn't building for shareholders. He wasn't building for anyone's approval. He was building because he loved it. And something unexpected happened. He bought a small computer graphics company that nobody thought was worth much. A tiny studio struggling to survive. He believed in what they were doing when almost nobody else did. And a decade later, that studio released a film that changed animation forever. He had become a billionaire, not from the company that fired him, but from the one he built in the silence after. And then, the phone rang. The company that had removed him was dying, losing money, losing direction, losing everything. And they needed him back. Not as a favor, not as a consolation, as the only person who could save it. So he went back, and what he built in the years that followed, the products, the designs, the moments that made the world stop, none of it would have existed if they hadn't fired him first. And when he returned, he didn't walk back in with anger. He didn't settle scores. He didn't remind anyone of what they had done. He just got to work. Because that was always who he was. Not the titles, not the recognition, not the vindication, just the work. And the people who watched him in those first months back said he was different, not softer, clearer, like someone who had been to the bottom of something and come back knowing exactly what mattered and what didn't. The years away had stripped everything that wasn't essential: the ego, the need for approval, the fear of getting it wrong, all of it gone. What was left was pure. A man who had lost everything and discovered that losing everything was the only way to find out what he was actually made of. And what he was made of turned out to be exactly what the world needed. There's a version of this story where he never comes back, where the humiliation is too much, where the silence wins, where the man who got fired from his own dream stays fired. That version almost happened. He almost ran, almost disappeared, almost let them define what his story meant. But he didn't. Not because he was fearless, because he understood something most people never learn: that being removed from the thing you built doesn't mean the thing you are was wrong. Sometimes the walls have to come down before you can see how much bigger the sky actually is. And Steve Jobs, the boy who slept on floors and collected bottles for food, the man who got fired from his own dream, didn't just rebuild. He built something the world had never imagined, and he did it because of the firing, not in spite of it. Aposte. So, if you're standing in the wreckage of something you built, if the thing you created has turned its back on you, remember this: sometimes the place that says no to you today carries your name forever.